The EU deeply deplores the consistent failure of Iran to conduct an impartial, transparent and thorough investigation without delay into the allegations of serious human rights violations, including torture and inhuman or degrading treatment, persistent violations of the right to a fair trial, prevalence of widespread arbitrary detentions, arbitrary restrictions on freedom of expression, including through the media and the Internet, use of violence, harassment and intimidation by government-directed militias to forcibly disperse Iranian citizens engaged in peaceful exercise of the right to freedom of association, continuing discrimination and other human rights violations against persons belonging to religious, ethnic, cultural, linguistic or other minorities.
Thank you, Mr. President. We're deeply concerned about the human rights situation in Iran, which has deteriorated sharply since the disputed elections of June 2009. Amnesty International reports it as the worst for 20 years. The ensuing crackdown on fundamental freedoms has created a climate of fear. Protesters, journalists, students, bloggers and human rights activists face harassment, intimidation and arbitrary arrest, with credible reports of mistreatment and torture in detention. Freedom of assembly has effectively been withdrawn. Media, press and internet restrictions are widespread. The increasing application of the death penalty, persecution of minority groups and growing disregard for legal due process are particularly worrying trends.
The human rights situation in Iran remains one of grave concern. Since last June's contested election, the Iranian government has engaged in systematic infringement of the Iranian people's right to basic liberty, freedom of speech, and political association. Peaceful political demonstrations have been prevented or disrupted with government violence against civilians. In January of this year, several mothers were arrested while silently commemorating the deaths of their children at the hands of government authorities. At least 35 journalists are currently imprisoned in Iran because of their efforts to report on civil and political activity since the election. Iranian authorities systematically slow internet connections and block the internet sites of human rights groups, independent media, and civil society organizations. The need for international monitoring and civil human rights protection mechanisms in Iran is self-evident.
1 year after the presidential elections in Iran, the Netherlands remains worried about the human rights situation in this country. We are also concerned about the increasing number of people convicted to death and the executions that have been carried out. The continued blockage, filtering and monitoring of mobile telephone communication, satellite television and the Internet, and other restrictive measures taken ahead of June 12 go against Iran's international obligations